Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's UNICON webinar, Make or Buy to Scale. I'm Rob Dietel, and I'll be moderating today's panel and discussion and webinar. I'm glad that you're able to join us. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping announcements that I'd like to make. First and foremost, this webinar today will be recorded and will be available later for viewing on the UNICON YouTube channel. So just a reminder that that will be available to you or your colleagues after today's webinar finishes. I also wanted to let you know that a copy of the slides are available. If you look at your navigation panel, you'll see that there's a handouts tab, and you're able to access the PDF of the slides through that link. So we'd encourage you to do that as well. Finally, we do hope that you'll be very engaged in today's session and jot down lots of questions. We usually allow for questions and answers at the end of the session. We have some time scheduled for that. To submit your questions, please use the question box that's on your navigation panel as well, and those will be relayed to our panelists today on the webinar. Lastly, like most UNICON events, this webinar today is governed by the antitrust policy. So we've included a slide on the antitrust policy just to make sure that everybody's aware that these provisions are also in effect for today. Make or buy to scale is a question that I'm sure most of us have come across in our executive education offices around the world. It's a very important and timely topic, and we have a wonderful session planned for you today. The report that this presentation is based on was written by Toby Wall and Jenny Stine, and Jenny Stine is here with us today to present the findings. Jenny Stine brings to this research project over a decade's experience leading professional and executive education offices both at MIT and Harvard. Today, she's an independent consultant, and her current focus, is on developing university corporate partnerships that lead to innovative, co-created experiences, including work with Accenture. She conducts research and does consulting in executive and professional education, and she's an instructor at Harvard Extension School, where she teaches organizational behavior, leadership, and teamwork. We're also joined by Mark Lewis and Julie Shapiro, who are on the UNICON Research Committee and work closely with both Toby and Jenny to support the development of this report. With that, Jenny, I'll turn it over to you, and we'll look forward to re-engaging at the end of the session with questions and answers.
Great, thank you so much, and welcome everyone. It's wonderful to have you here as part of this session. So this is a brief overview of what we're going to do. I'm going to walk through the high-level research findings. So if you haven't had a chance to read the report yet, you'll get a general sense of what we learned when we did this research. And then Mark and Julie, as the UNICON sponsors and two people actively engaged in the make or buy thinking, will give reactions, what they learned from the report, or what struck them as particularly important, and then we'll have Q&A. And so if you have questions, do jot them down. There's a Q&A tool, I believe, that you can put them in, and then Rob will organize the questions at the end. So would love for this to be interactive, would love to make it really customized and tailored to what you're interested in terms of the findings of the report or other questions you might have around make or buy. So let's get started. So when we started this project, we thought it was a straightforward question. Should executive education organizations make or buy to scale? And we learned that this answer is surprisingly complex and really requires some thought. Some of our findings that we discovered in the process of this report, and for this report, we did a number of in-depth interviews with schools involved both in make and in buy, and at different stages, schools that had been doing scaled education for a number of years and who were just getting out of the gate and starting it. So some of the high-level findings that we learned: first, that scaled technology-enabled education is currently growing and driving growth, and it's expected to continue. We learned that scaled offerings in open and custom programs are not simple to design, produce, or deliver. And that has a lot of implications both for how we design programs and our executive education organizations. We learned that partnerships can be effective, and a lot of schools are using or considering partnership strategies, but they also have intrinsic risks that need to be mindfully managed. And I'm going to talk a lot more about that because it's one of the really interesting findings. And then we learned that moving to scaled offerings affects the executive education organization, including staff roles, structures, and faculty relationships. So we're really in a major shift right now, both where technology is coming of age, where our customers in executive education are asking for different types of delivery and different ways of working with us. And there are partners slash potential competitors out there in this space trying to fill those needs as well. So our findings confirmed that all of the leaders we spoke with are addressing to some degree dimensions of scaling to meet the demands of the market. And for some, it might just be adapting one or two open enrollment programs in digital formats. For others, it's a radical restructuring of their offerings, creating new and substantial products that are packaged and delivered very differently than traditional classroom programs. So what does scale mean? Scale has many different dimensions, and sometimes we just think of it in terms of people or geography, and those are important, but there are also different languages, cultural norms, learner levels, age and experience, different types of learning options and opportunities. And of course, in the forefront of that is this idea of going to smaller and smaller learning experiences, the micro learning, the nano learning, and then also the content of the course material. Some of the approaches that we found when we did the interviews, many we spoke with were focused on scaling and open enrollment. That was a sense of a place where you could start. And most are operating in the range of hundreds with only one in the thousands. So working in these lower numbers is perceived as more safe for the schools, although a number of schools are sort of trying in the hundreds to scale in the thousands with the idea of potentially going to the tens of thousands. These numbers are of course very different than the early MOOC numbers, which were behind some of this. Many people, the majority of the people we spoke with think of MOOCs as largely not meeting the needs of executives and executive education. So interesting comment that scaling is different. Virtual doesn't necessarily equate to scaling depending on how you deliver that. So we're not just talking about virtual programs here. And in fact, we're going to see more and more different types of content delivery. So about the approaches to scaling with content, 3 schools we interviewed were having good success. In other cases, it involved adding content that was complementary to or different from the content that faculty teach. Content partners were both other schools within the universities, nonprofits, and professional organizations outside of the universities, for-profits. So some examples of that, you have business schools partnering with an engineering school or a school that teaches a biotech skills internally to scale their offerings in terms of content. But you also had people going outside doing certification type programs and that type of thing. So very interesting mix, very much responsive to what businesses needing topics that include a strong business anchor, but cross outside and cover technology topics or other sectors or areas. So why scale? Why are schools choosing to scale? Revenue growth was number one. People are really seeing this as a driver, and that's actually being borne out by the numbers that they're getting. The schools that are successful in this are seeing nice revenue growth from these programs, meeting market demands, as we mentioned. Large, especially global corporations, any multinational corporation that has a centralized training function where they're trying to roll training out across different geographies, it becomes very cost prohibitive to do face-to-face programs, and so online programs are very attractive for those companies. Impact, and this is important. So you know, it's always balancing, as we do in executive education, balancing that idea of, yes, we are supporting our school through revenue, but impact is really our primary mission, and getting our faculty's content out there, helping reshape industry and provide this research-based education for executives in industry, and learning from that. So that's still a very important part of why schools choose to scale. Not falling behind is an interesting one. So a lot of schools are kind of looking around and saying, gosh, other people are doing this. We don't want to fall behind the learning curve. We better try something. And we applaud that approach. At the same time, it's also really important to think about some of the risks. So it is very important to do that learning around this, and to think strategically about that. So nice quote, you know, leverage is fundamentally what we do. The core asset is the faculty member and the live teaching sessions. And that's the approach that many schools have taken to choosing to scale. Online, as I mentioned, is currently driving growth. So several schools reported the percent of revenues from online is up 10 to 15% from single digits a few years ago. So definitely seeing nice growth. One school is at 15%, projecting 25. Another's at 30%, projecting 50% growth. And all interviewed, and this is really important, all interviewed believe this is new business, not self-cannibalization. I think that, you know, back in the day, and I'm a back in the day person, I've been around for a while, back in the day that there was that worry of, if we offer this for less money online and it's the same content, will people still come for our face-to-face courses? And that has not been the case. We're reaching new audiences and different audiences with these online courses. So the market is really asking for digital content. And I can tell you this for myself, with both hats on, both the work I do with corporations and with executive educations. And one of our interviewees mentioned that digital content is basically becoming a hygiene factor, that if schools don't have it, it's really hard to progress that conversation. And businesses really need that anytime, anywhere, chunked content, and are exploring new types of credentialing, like certificates and badges. And all of that is coming into play in terms of how we're choosing to scale. And scaling, of course, can create greater impact if done well, developing leaders. And many schools are thinking of this as taking existing assets and experiences to current or similar customers, and replicating the face-to-face and replicating face-to-face is not easy. We've always known it's not easy. There are a lot of schools doing really interesting experiments with this in terms of different types of delivery. And as we learn more and more about these scaled, including blended programs, we're learning how to do some new things as well. So. Not falling behind, as I said, is important. You know, there are schools that are well on their way to doing much more in this space than others. And if you haven't started yet, or you're only getting started, you probably are behind a little bit. And being focused on catching up is really important. So let's talk about the make or buy question. Two nice quotes from the report. Make or buy is infinitely complicated. These are not technology questions, but business model and partnership questions. And that really needs to be at the forefront. Another very representative comment that we heard when we did this research: we're using lots of options, no dominant paradigm. Each school has to find out what is right. So those are very much approaches people are taking. I think the business model and partnership, I really want to underline that as being central. I think, you know, again, back in the day, we used to think about scaled education and anything that was done online. We used to think about it from technology, the limitations and the opportunities of technology. But the reality is, it has to be about where you want to go in terms of growth, what kinds of customers you want to reach, and how you can serve your current customers as their approach to doing these types of programs or wanting these types of programs changes. So 3 basic strategies that schools are pursuing. One is build it yourself and consider partners later. This is, of course, the high cost strategy. It's not possible for all schools, but it does give the school the most control. It gives control over how the experience is designed and how it's rolled out and how it's marketed. And there are some real advantages to doing that, if you know, for the schools that can afford it, because they're really owning their space and probably maximizing their learning. Again, expensive. There are schools that are trying a few things with a few different partners, and this is really very much that learning approach, kind of get your toe in the water, try some different things. There are pluses and minuses. Definitely the schools that are doing this are learning about their learning, but there are questions of, do the partners really have that much knowledge that you don't already have in the school, and really what are they bringing to the table? And one of our interviewees gave some very interesting insights around, you know, it sounds like they're bringing a lot to the table, and we maybe don't negotiate hard enough with them as exec ed organizations, because really the brand and the content are so much larger, and we bring a great deal in terms of learning design as well. Or engage actively in partnerships and internal development. So those are the 3 models that we saw out there. One more thing on the few things with a few partners piece, that you have to really manage these partners, even the well-known ones, the names that are out there that other schools are working with. We heard that managing the quality of what's produced, overseeing that in a kind of continual way is very, very important, and actually requires resources. So even if you're partnering and trying a few things, you're going to need to put resources against that. So these are, if we think kind of strategically about the different capabilities that are needed for scaling, you need, of course, the platform and delivery, and pretty much everybody is outsourcing that, or at least buying that. You know, whether you use Canvas or whether you use, you know, some other platform, whether you use a partner's platform that they've developed, you need that ability, and really it's not in the day and age where it makes any sense to buy it. You're to build it. You're either going to license it as a customer of a platform company, or get it through a partnership. And what's available in this platform is really, really important to your customers in exec ed. So you need mobile. You need the bandwidth and the firewall solutions. You need single sign-on and corporate LMS integration. And if you haven't done that before, go find out what that means and figure out a solution for it. Because if you can't integrate the scaled offerings with the learning management systems that the corporations have, or you're expecting them to pay for that integration, that's an extra cost and a lot of extra time to work with you. ADA accessibility, and then security, both security and GDPR compliance. Again, if you haven't run across GDPR yet, you will. GDPR, those are the new privacy laws in Europe. They apply to all executive education programs. And so those are the kinds of things that are basically housekeeping things, but you need to have an approach, a strategy in order to work well with your especially with your larger customers. There's marketing and reach, the sales, enrollment, invoicing, administration of geographically and culturally diverse participants. And so this is, some schools want to keep this in-house and some schools want to outsource it. And again, there are pros and cons of either way. And then there's the learning experience, scaling the touch, video productions. And again, do you want to design that internally or have it done externally and just manage it? Some other capability considerations you need to keep in mind. So staff who can engage and manage these outside providers, from the business relationship to the content production. And there was one interesting interviewee who said, don't let your faculty negotiate these deals, right? Because sometimes they don't have the understanding of the business behind it and what needs to be. And there was a sense in a couple of our interviews that some of the schools that are going kind of early in with these partnership deals are giving away too much in terms of percentage of revenue. So just take that as a caution. the ability to design or manage new offerings, a greater role for marketing and influencing program design, and then the agreements that you need with your faculty as well. And that's another interesting piece where you need a really good strategy in terms of helping them be realistic about what they can get. One great piece of advice we got both with vendors in making agreements with vendors and agreements with faculty is think short term. Do it for a year or two, try it out, and keep the door open so you can renegotiate that. Because if you get into a this is our policy and it's never going to change situation, you might then no longer have something that works from a business perspective. So what does scaling mean for your organization? You are going to have, there is going to be upfront investment. So whether you make or buy, it involves thinking differently about revenues, right? So if you're thinking about a standard open enrollment program or a standard custom program, you know what your upfront costs are going to be. They're relatively small, and you're going to be able to recoup those in the first or second or maybe third iteration of that program. For online programs, there's much more of an upfront investment and longer time to recoup that investment. That said, remember those growth numbers that I showed at the start of this presentation, which is that these once you do get these up and running, there is some pretty good data that they are driving revenue growth. So you're not just, it's not as speculative as it might have been 5 years ago or something. And then you're going to need to think about new roles in your executive education organizations. You've got to do the market analysis in a different way. You've got the strategic decisions, evaluating and managing partners and vendors. Underline that one. If you're using them, you've got to actively work with them. Recruiting and compensating faculty, how you're assessing the impact of these programs, and then how you're managing the costs. So we ended the report by asking the question, is executive education being disrupted? Because it's very interesting. I mean, right now there's a line of thought that either one, we're in this for the long term, we're going to build it ourselves and own it, and that's a good strategy if you can afford it. Then there's also this line of thought of we should work with partners. And in working with partners, what's happening is you're creating, well, from an exec ed perspective, they're a channel for your programs in your brand. From a customer perspective, they might start to become who they're working with. And so that's very interesting. So let's dig into this question about disruption a little bit. Corporations still see value in what we offer in executive education, and this is really important. Even though they've migrated to new ways of working and learning, and they've become highly sophisticated designers and consumers of scaled learning, even with that, they know that business school-based education, research-based education, and the strong faculty and program designs are valuable, and they're still looking for those closer, more collaborative relationships. So as they become more sophisticated, they're looking for stronger, more collaborative relationships from you. MOOCs are considered largely unsuccessful, as I mentioned at the start of this webinar. We've seen some kind of upper limits. There are concerns about quality, the low touch approach, the completion rates, and the impacts. So we're really not seeing that as the primary way that people are scaling education, but rather micro learning, things like high touch at a distance. How to do that is really where people are going. Face-to-face is not going to disappear, and here we're a little bit like that story about the a face-to-face may be a little bit about like the horse and buggy versus the car, right? The wagon maker, who many will go away, but some will stay, and they'll be doing incredibly high quality and get great margins. And that can be a strategy. I mean, if you're really great at face-to-face, if you don't need to grow beyond that, and you're able to do it, that's going to stay around, especially for kind of the mid-sized companies and individuals. As I said, the large global companies, it gets very, very expensive for them to bring people, but they will do it if there's a really important strategic need. So, there's very much a sense that kind of bespoke education, put everyone on a boat, create a really great experience, is safe, but of course it's not scalable. And also from the corporations, the sense that universities are not and should not be going away, and we're really looking to them to bring things that will help enhance the overall approach to learning in the organization. But partnerships, proceed with caution. So I've laid some groundwork for this in a couple of other slides, and it's really, I think, one of our, if the big takeaways from this report is, one is you're probably going to need to do this in order to continue to scale revenues, because it is how scaled education, blended, distance, virtual, different types of things we're still inventing are the future, right? If you want to continue to grow, and proceed with caution on the partnerships, because, and that's from a contracting perspective, and just understanding that they may be getting as much or more out of it than you are. We tend to be very gracious in terms of, well, we want to learn and they know, so we'll learn from them. But remember, they're learning as much or more from us than we learn from them. If we're in there telling them what quality looks like, they're learning that along with us. Schools need to evaluate the real value of the data provided. So this is another thing that we uncovered with the partnerships, where often they'll provide data back, but are they really giving you what you need to understand these new markets, to understand these new customers, to understand what the experience is, and to make sure that you're building that back into your organization, and that understanding of the data and the new customers isn't just staying at that partner. Content, you can't assume, because a partner's developing content for you, that it's transportable, right? So you can't assume that if you're working with X, Y, or Z partner, that you could bring it back and put it into Canvas, because depending on how it's designed, that may not work. So if you're working with a partner, you'll want to start with a strategy from the beginning where you could clearly bring that content back in-house if you chose not to work with that partner in the future. And then there's this bigger issue of schools risking being disintermediated from their customers. Again, you may see a partner as a channel for your brand and your product, but your customers may see it as a new way to work with universities, and you may lose that customer in the process. So do be careful about that. It's quite important. Couple of final quotes from the report. It's not, if commercial partners maintain quality, increase revenues, and decrease costs over time, in other words, get the business model right, it's not difficult to imagine they could take on even more. Could they become opportunities to outsource executive education entirely? We have not seen this, but it could happen. I mean, if they get really good at what we do and can do it in a more cost-effective manner, then that will come up as a possibility. And also competition in understanding how people learn, how they apply what they learn, may end up residing in the customers, with the customers of executive education, and corporations will be looking for providers that are at least as sophisticated, if not more, than we are. Understanding more about learning, how people learn, what we learn. We have a huge amount of tacit knowledge in this in executive education. If you've ever designed an exec ed program, sat through, watched the participants, looked at the outcomes, you know and can feel what is real education and how to create that. So, but it is tacit knowledge, and I think in today's world we're expecting to have more formal knowledge and more research knowledge about that. So another thing to think about. So get on the train, but mind the gap. Go out there, do it, try this, but be thoughtful about how you're contracting, who you're contracting with, the duration of these contracts, whether or not your assets can be brought back in-house if you need to do that or decide to do that, and the type of investment that you'll need to make, whether or not you're doing this a build or a buy. So that's our presentation. I think I'd like to turn it over to Mark Lewis and Julie Shapiro now to give their reactions and comments, and then hopefully we've raised lots of interesting questions in your guys' minds, and we can have some Q&A.
Jenny, thank you very much. This is Rob again. Just briefly, Mark unfortunately has encountered some technical difficulties, and I think he's dialed in, but may not be able to join the discussion. But we do still have Julie online as well. So at this point, we welcome any questions from the audience that you may have. Please, again, submit them through the navigation panel through your question box, and those will be relayed.
Great. So Julie, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you so much, Jenny. That was great. And I just want to say, you know, given where UC Berkeley is located, kind of in the heart of Silicon Valley and the San Francisco Bay Area, the question that you just asked, is executive education being disrupted, is really on my mind and on the mind of my organization. And I think it should be on everyone's mind. I do believe it is being disrupted. You know, this is a time that, you know, is both, you know, it's the unknown, but it's also a time of great opportunity. And what I find exciting about the report and just this time right now is that we're all in experimentation mode. There's a lot of course, you know, you talked about in your report, there's some people who are more the first movers who've been really experimenting in this space for a while. And then there's people who are just starting out. I would definitely, as you said, encourage everyone to kind of get in the game and start, you know, experimenting. But like you said, do so very wisely, because so we've been experimenting a bit at UC Berkeley. We've launched several courses with a couple different partners. We're actually having quite a bit of success with those programs. We've also developed our own content, and you know, we've done it both in the open enrollment and the customized space, and it's been very interesting. You know, I think we're at the point with the open enrollment course where it's actually doing well. We've got a lot of traction, and we started with one of our most popular courses. So I think that's always a good way to figure out what course is, you know, so popular that you're having trouble, you know, offering enough of the live courses during the year, and start with that. And just really be thoughtful about how you digitize it, because it's so important. I also think that you raise a good point about, you know, that we're all in sort of a different space in terms of how long we've been at this, our experience. And so this is a great time to turn to the UNICON community and learn from one another. And I wanted to mention also about some of the things that we've learned. You talked about the partnerships. It is really important to be very strategic, really think about which partner you'll work with, and be very, very, very careful about the terms, because we have had situations where our clients say, oh yeah, we love working with you, and they're working with our partner and we don't even know. So that's kind of what you're talking about, getting, you know, being I can't pronounce the word, disintermediate. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And some other things that have come up is that you talked about being very careful about, you know, being able to use your assets. So we've been very deliberate about when we negotiate with a partner, we make sure that we maintain the IP, and that's so important. And also that you know, we're able to take the content back into our organization and use it. So you have to make sure that they give it to you in a format that's usable. And the same thing goes for faculty. You know, faculty content, and you have to think about how do you maintain it for the faculty. How do you also pay faculty? You know, is it royalty based? How do you do it? And I liked what you said about, you know, kind of thinking short term. You know, try something out, maybe say this is how we're going to do it for this year, and then have the ability to renegotiate with faculty. And then also with clients, you have to make sure, you know, a lot of clients want to take They want to take the content and cascade it throughout the organizations, their whole organization. But you have to make sure, that they have to keep coming back to you and that you own the intellectual property at each stage. So it's really important to be very thoughtful about how you roll out your strategy. And then I wanted to just talk about, so we have used the open enrollment kind of as a testing ground, but we've also been getting more and more requests from custom programs, custom clients to say that, they want a blended program and not just, with like a pre-program webinar and a post-program webinar, but they actually want kind of online engagement throughout. And so it's very important to think about how you design the course. How do you keep it high touch? How do you price it? Because like I said, you have to make sure that you're always keeping control of the content. And then lastly, what I think is very important is how do you show return on investment, or a term that I like even better, return on learning. So that all has to be figured into the design and the strategy of all of your programs. So yeah, so those are some of my comments.
Thank you so much, Julie. And I don't see Mark on, unfortunately. I know he was really trying to join. So Rob,
Yeah.
did we get
Unfortunately,
any?
I don't think Mark's going to be able to join us, but we do have a couple of questions coming in from the audience. And the first one is, yes, disruption is an interesting thing to ponder and keep an eye on. I still don't see the evidence that people want or value a credential from Coursera more than a credential from a 100-year-old university. Legacy brands, if we can call universities that, still count in my humble opinion. The Coursera's know that too, which is why their websites lead with university logos. So more of a comment there, but perhaps you'd like to respond to that.
I think that's true today, but the question is, will it still be true in the same way 5 years from now, especially if the Coursera's of the world, and not specifically them, but there's a handful of different groups that are doing this, get really good at working with these large learning organizations, speaking their language, and motivating their people. I mean, there's no question that universities have the best brand, but I think one of the disruption thoughts is, might they start running exec ed for some universities, and just own the whole thing. So it is going to be very different 5 years from now and 10 years from now than it is today, because of how the general environment where business education sits is. And if you factor in things coming in like AI and other types of capabilities. So the demand for our traditional offerings will not go away, but there's a great deal of confusion about the brands by the customers in terms of what some of these partners are offering. And as Julie gave the perfect example, oh, I've enjoyed working with you so much, and they're not working with you at all, they're working with your partner. And it's something to consider and to be thoughtful about.
And there's a related question that's a little bit more specific about pricing. I worry about pricing for online programs. It seems like a race to the bottom. By the time we've finished an online build, which takes months, the competitive prices seem to have again fallen. Is this a race to zero?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That we did not hear that in the research. We didn't speak with anyone who said we've made a huge investment and not seen our return on that. It definitely means thinking differently about it. In terms of pricing, I think that probably thinking about how you're delivering in smaller modules to maintain your returns, that would be one thing I would think about, smaller pieces and how to do that, licensing agreements, that type of thing. But we did not hear that it's a race to the bottom. We did not hear that these things are going to go away or are not business opportunities. But we did hear that you have to think differently than you would about a normal program where you could recoup the investment in the short term, that it does take longer term. It's a longer term strategy to do this, and it takes more upfront investment.
Great, thank you. A question about the partners. The research seemed to discuss the partner pool somewhat, that many schools are working with a few partners. Did you uncover any insider information on the size of the universe of potential partners? Are there a few key players? Is it more dispersed? Any trends or insight in that area?
We've listed them in the report. There are a few key players that schools are working with. So if you're interested in the specific names, you can go to the report.
Great. And again, the report is published on the website as well, on the UNICON website. One last question that's coming in is, you mentioned that these programs are not cannibalizing the traditional residential or campus-based programs. Is there any flip side to that? Is this driving new customers that perhaps weren't familiar with the university, took an online program, and then followed up by coming to an on-campus program?
You know, so it's a great question. We didn't hear that specifically, but I'll tell you an interesting story that we heard from one of the interviewees, which is that, so one of the things that was in the back of our mind was age and demographics. And this interviewee told us that they're finding that some of the more traditional companies are really excited about online, and some of your kind of newer hip companies really want to come back to the universities, right? So that you know, it's a little bit of a role reversal there from what you would think. Your digital natives love the idea of doing the face-to-face, and some of the more traditional customers are really excited about online and think it's amazing. So that was one story we heard in that space. I think it's just it's a bigger, broader world, and learning how to play in that, particularly thinking about who your core corporate customers are and what they're asking for from you, is super important, because you know, that they're your partners, they're your friends. Those people who are out there in these large learning organizations, they're doing the best to get the money together and what the requests to give you so that you can partner with them. So being a good partner and understanding what it is they need to make their budgets and to do the kind of global learning that they need is also really important.
Great. And you have another couple questions. Is there still a corporate emphasis on investing in high potential programs versus scaling to larger audiences? What's happening here?
So that's interesting. I mean, I think we've seen it just historically in exec ed, we've seen the investment in kind of high potential leadership development go down since the 1980s, right? I mean, it's never been as high as it was back in the 70s, when there was, you know, that really supported those large leadership development programs. For me, it depends so much on the company and the industry whether they're doing that. I think in industries where this was a different research project I was working on, but interestingly, I was talking to some U.S. defense organizations about what they were doing to develop their leadership in engineering, and you know, they're in a situation where they can't often buy because that requires H-1B visas and that sort of thing that they can't get, in security clearances. So you've got some companies that have to make their executives, and you've got others where it's part of their strategy to build them globally, which may or may not involve a university component. So I would say I wouldn't go to the bank on that one. I would say, you know, it again depends on who the customers are that you're serving and what they're able to do. But any type of I can tell you for sure, any type of high-priced, high-touch program is going to be on the radar in terms of training budgets. And the more you can do to support your customers in terms of being able to offer those and show that return. I know UNICON, you're doing a return on an ROI conference coming up, and it's really critical. They need that. So.
Well, we don't have any other questions, so I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you, Jenny, for leading us through the webinar. I'd like to thank Julie as well for joining us. And my apologies to Mark Lewis, who had the technical difficulties. He was on for the beginning of the call, but I know he wasn't able to participate in the Q&A, so hopefully we'll catch him next time. As just a final reminder, we will be posting this webinar to the UNICON website and YouTube channel, so we encourage you to let your colleagues know about this. Jenny, any final thoughts before we sign off, or Julie?
I just want to thank everyone for joining, and thank UNICON for the opportunity to do this research. These are really fascinating projects to do, and we really appreciate the opportunity to do it, both on behalf of Toby, my partner in this, and myself. We really appreciated it.
Great. Well, thank you again, and we'll hope to see all of you back again soon for another future UNICON webinar. And with that in mind, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Rob.